Artificial intelligence is reinventing almost every industry, especially software. Vista Equity Partners is at the forefront of a revolution in enterprise software that is changing the way companies do business. We sat down with Robert Smith, Vista's chairman, founder, and CEO, to talk about the private companies that will be the biggest winners in the next AI wave, as well as Vista's new Agentic Factory and his own personal AI agent he calls Q. Welcome to Inside Alts. I'm Robert Frank. Let's talk about the private equity space as a whole. You guys are obviously different for a lot of reasons, but it has been a challenging couple of years for private equity, especially from the perspective of high net worth investors and family offices. They haven't had much distributions or realizations. Returns have underperformed public markets, and it's tough to get a lot of high net worth investors and family offices to believe in the sector to put in more money. What do you think next year looks like for private equity?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the dynamic that people are now realizing, and those who have the ability to fundamentally create value in companies are able to continue to return capital at similar or the same rates that they have in the past, like us, for instance. But the public market dynamic has been interesting. This whole idea of AI and has sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the air for a lot of investors and pulled them into Mag 7 plus type companies. So that's going to be an interesting comp and comparison relative to private equity businesses that, if you're really creating value consistently, will return capital consistently at the rates of return. I think they'll be historically quite comparable. We've seen in our markets really interesting opportunity. There was in 2020 and 2021, you saw a run up in the marketplace. They've now come down in enterprise software. So it's been a wonderful buying opportunity, especially as you're transforming businesses to become agentic. And so we're going to see that third leg, what I call of the AI journey, really start to kick in. First leg, of course, being hardware vendors. That's where you're seeing a lot of the capital that's been going. Second being these hyperscalers. And those hyperscalers are now starting to build out the infrastructure and capabilities. Some may argue they're overvalued in some respects. And then the third wave is the application providers. And that's typically been the way that these cycles have played out. The application providers usually get the lion's share of the economic rent long term once the technology has been diffused into those markets and diffused into those technologies. So that's really where we are in the cycle.
And I want to get to that Agentic Factory in a second, but broadly you mentioned private versus public markets. And for somebody who wants to invest in AI today, it appears that most of the opportunity, or a lot of it, is happening in the private markets. Where do you see public versus private in terms of the opportunity for investors to really invest in what will be the successful AI companies?
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, what will be. Again, application provider, those who are utilizing generative AI are private today. 99+% of these companies are private application software type companies.
And so, not to interrupt, but why should we focus on that rather than the hyperscalers and who has the best LLM at any moment?
There will be a few that not only survive, but will thrive in that marketplace. In the enterprise, you actually don't need large language models. You can actually execute using small language models and smaller footprints and utilizing different technologies that I think will actually, again, create massive economic rent pickup. But that has to be diffused into the workflows of these enterprise software companies. The hardware vendors, again, have some unique positions. One in particular today, those unique.
NVIDIA.
Yeah, NVIDIA. Ultimately, there are, and we know of these companies because we've been investing in a few of them, where you're going to see a different level of silicon that's going to be used at the edge in some cases in these environments. Obviously, Google, with their latest announcement, has created a stir in the market, but they also have the only fully integrated stack. So there's a great opportunity to invest there in some respects. Now, with all that said, ultimately, they are providing a utility that can be then used by applications providers to serve businesses. And in that regard, those are going to be the long-term economic rent capturing opportunities for investors.
Well, and that's interesting because when I talk to family offices and high net worth investors, and they're just wondering, look, we know that AI has got to be our number one investment theme, and all the surveys show that. But they don't know exactly how to do it. Should they invest in the hyperscalers? Should they try to get into OpenAI and Perplexity and all of the private LLM companies? Or should they find companies where if you apply AI to their business, whatever that business,
right,
then you're going to ramp up productivity, you're going to ramp up customer service, you're going to ramp up everything. So how do you see and how do you address that question?
Sure. In our world of enterprise software, I say there's kind of three categories, and that's why as an investor, you really need to know what you're doing, right? On the one category, companies can become agentic. What does that mean? That means agents are actually performing the tasks within a call it the workflows of enterprise software at a higher frequency, a higher precision rate than what you could do as a worker using a tool. That creates a massive economic opportunity, and I like to say AI will enable enterprise software to eat services. And so what that does is create a massive opportunity for growth, hyper-accelerated growth in these markets once these businesses are operating. The second category is what I call the rule of 70. So in enterprise software, we've always operated under gold standards of rule of 40. And that's a combination of growth rate and EBITDA margin. Well, as you apply AI, Gen AI across the cost infrastructure of enterprise software, product development, we're seeing 30, 40, 50% productivity in writing code for new code.
Already.
And it's just now existing code is somewhere between 2 and 12%, but over time it's going to tip more new code is going to replace the existing code. So you can actually develop a lot more code a lot faster and much lower cost. Your go-to-market opportunities, how do you make your salespeople more effective? Enterprise software, typically one of the issues is what's your customer acquisition cost. Gen AI enables that to come down dramatically because you have series of agents that actually act as pre-sales, in some cases even sales capabilities across that. Your services component, this is where you're actually providing services to customers. You can actually build out series of agents in AI, in an AI format or agentic format that operate in a services component that actually bring your services costs down. And then of course all the back office operations become much more efficient. So as a result of that, you'll be able to boost margins pretty dramatically, almost double them in many respects for existing enterprise software companies that are serving large scale industries. So those two categories are great places to invest. Now, with that said, 97% of those companies are private. So you're not going to have access to those companies unless you're coming through, call it the private equity markets, or companies that are actually embracing this, call it this change in paradigm of how you actually create productivity utilizing this new tool in the environments. And that's what you're actually looking for as an investor in the private space.
Well, it's interesting too, because there's this narrative on Wall Street or public markets that AI is eating software companies and it's going to destroy software companies and replace them. You don't see that. How do you, with your dozens of companies, your assets over $100 billion, scale agentic AI?
Right. The paradigm again is agentic enterprise software, rule of 70, and no right to exist. Okay. Now here's the interesting, and I think one of the most important parts is those companies that have sovereignty and dominion over the workflows and data sets have an opportunity to become in part one or part two. Okay, if you are basically repurposing data and information that has been available in the public marketplace and selling that or reselling it content, you'll end up in point three.
And there's a lot of those.
Oh, there are, and so that's why it will eat those companies, no question about it. But 1 and 2, you actually have the ability, if you create again agentic components within workflows that you have the unique dominion over. Remember, less than 1% of enterprise data actually is in the environment that has been used to train these large foundational models. Less than 1%. I think IBM put a study out about that. As a result of that, if you continue to maintain that dynamic, you can be in a unique position to deliver agentic solutions to an industry that no one else can, and capture what I call the economic rent associated with it. So that's why I say AI will enable enterprise software to, in essence, eat services. The services being people and dynamics that are providing, call it the task that these agents could do much more efficiently at a higher rate and higher frequency.
And tell us about what Agentic Factory, the Agentic Factory is.
Sure.
How did you come up with the idea? Where's it going?
Yeah, so for us at Vista, we've always thought about how do you transform enterprise software and how to do it at scale. Really bring a unique value-added capability to the investing landscape. And so in the early days, again, 25 years ago, all enterprise software companies were on-premise. In essence, you had some system that you had, which is typically hardware, IBM 370s, those sort of things that you had with systems administrators who were writing code and those sort of things that your users then used. We then had a really unique technology come in called hosted, right, or cloud. And so we built a factory to transform on-premise software companies to cloud software companies. And I think as a result of that have now converted more businesses from on-prem to cloud, I think, than really any institution on the planet. And we found basically a 2.5 to 3 times economic rent pickup when you transfer a company from on-prem to cloud, reduction of the hardware refresh cycle, reduction of, call it, the systems administrator components to it. And so it became a much more efficient way to deliver enterprise software to customers. But we have a new technology, new general purpose technology, and we'll call it, Gen AI. So now we have built a factory to go from cloud to Gen AI. We have over 30 companies now through the factory who are actually producing revenue associated with this sort of conversion. And we'll finish the rest of, call it, the next 30 or 40 of our companies over the next quarter or so. And it is unique in that what we've done is build out the capabilities to transform these businesses and actually create agentic engines and agentic products that work within the workflows that give the high precisions that enterprises demand. I like to say it this way. In the world of consumer AI, 93% precision is okay. Okay, where you and I can say, oh, let's go out to dinner, let's find a Thai restaurant, and we go to the LLMs out there, and 93% of the time it'll find the restaurant, and we're fine, and it'll book it at the time. 7% of the time we're going to show up at a restaurant that actually has a Thai dish on the menu, and we might be okay with that in consumer environment. That does not work in banking. It does not work in insurance. It does not work in automotive. You need to have a higher level of precision, so you actually have to build agentic workflows with a higher precision output based on how these models, these probabilistic models actually work. That's what our Agentic Factory does. We now have the ability to do it at scale. Over 2.5 years ago, we built out the infrastructure, and now we have the right partners to do it with, who are hyperscalers who have capacity and technological capability that we can then infuse into each of our companies to make this a reality.
For non-enterprise software experts, for people that don't really understand exactly how an agent works within a company, can you give an example of an agent that you guys have created that's deployed, what it's done, and how it's helped a certain kind of company?
Sure. Again, we have over 30 companies that have agentic solutions in the marketplace. Everything from utilizing an agent to help identify a healthcare worker to solve a problem that you may have in particular, utilizing some solution or system. We have a company called Simple Practice. We're now integrating it into 2 of the major hyperscalers, so that as people are incurring issues, it will identify, here's a sort of practitioner, book the appointment for you in a place that's close by and has access to their calendars, those sort of things. That is one simple example. There are also more complex examples. We have agents that actually manage tariff dynamics for large-scale enterprise companies that say, we need to change. There's been a change in tariff in a particular location. Where can we get substitute goods, different product at a different price, and actually deliver the same period of time that we need in order to keep our manufacturing organizations operating? So full spectrum. We also have it for our sports business, and so you can get full-time information and do what-if analysis of, well, what if we played that player? A lot of people would like to, armchair quarterback or Monday morning quarterback these, games. It will actually run through various scenarios that have a high precision in the output as to what, based on the statistics, what it could have been. So it's a full range. It affects every single industry. And part of our goal, of course, is to ensure that our companies get there fast first and have the ability to deliver agentic solutions that provide real, tangible value to the customer set. So a full range of opportunity there.
And speaking of fast first, you guys have been so far ahead for years thinking about AI, not just where it is, but where it's going. How has that changed your investor base? Because I think for a long time you were the big institutional investors, the sovereign wealth funds, and recently you have been very successful attracting high net worth investors and family offices. So how do you see that group and its importance for Vista going forward?
Sure, it's been really interesting. It's been an organic journey. Typically what we do is often we look for companies to buy, enterprise software companies, and we will go buy an enterprise software company. The owner/founder of that business will then end up with a liquidity event, and they will look at our returns, and as we've gone through and say, hey, listen, can I invest it with you? And we're like, yeah, sure, you can invest with us. And over 25 years, all of a sudden you end up with a pretty large, call it high net worth channel, which is made up of high net worth, individuals, some of which we've, provided opportunity to, and then others are, word of mouth sort of dynamics that occur in these environments. From there, we've been contacted for years with, from the large wirehouses and the RAs, and hey, how can we invest and how can we invest? And so we started opening the window. I think one of the few that actually said, okay, we're going to limit the amount and just get overrun with demand in some respects. But we're finding that has actually a nice symbiotic dynamic associated with it, because we're finding and meeting with these sort of folks, they're actually saying, hey, here are some other areas. Remember, a lot of the high net worth families, they come from an entrepreneurial spirit. They have run businesses. They understand our value creation dynamic because we are software operators at the end of the day. They're like, oh, we get that. We understand how you bring unique value to your companies. And so that resonates with them. So it's been a wonderful journey to be on. We'll continue to, of course, drive our institutional business, quite aggressively in what we do. It's been a nice benefit to have a new set of investors to come along to actually help us expand our capabilities.
And when we look broadly at AI and this question of is AI in a bubble, I mean, obviously in the beginning of any new technology, we have overinvestment, we have a misallocation of capital. Clearly, there will be winners and losers here. Right. The bubble question is not a binary one, right? So when you look at the types of companies that you think will be the winners and the types that you think might have a struggle, how do you look at that?
So again, for us, we focus on enterprise software that can become agentic enterprise. First of all, sovereignty and dominion over workflows and data sets. Do you have something that no one else has? That when you agentify, you can capture more and more economic revenue?
In other words, broadly, it's the application of AI,
right,
as opposed to the AI thing itself, the LLM.
Right, it's the application of AI as opposed to the infrastructure. Infrastructure is a cost of goods for us. And as more capital flows into it, it becomes a lower cost of goods, right? Yeah. Not surprising. So we are beneficiaries of, in some respects, this overcapacity build that's occurring. So as I'll call it, if you want to measure it in terms of, power, which is really some the inference that we'll ultimately use, tokens is how we're measuring it. That cost of tokens is coming down as a result of all the capital flowing in that environment, which gives us the ability to actually increase the gross margins of the utilization of our agents. So it's a wonderful dichotomy if you're on the back end of the applications user of AI across these enterprise businesses.
And I know you yourself personally use AI. You have an agent. What are some of the most surprising things that you've found, used, or done with AI in the past few months?
Sure. My agent, Agent Q, actually, I have about 20 different categories that Agent Q is monitoring, call it every day, or utilizing every day, from the way that we run our business here at Vista to the information and insights that I want from different parts of the world. And so every morning I go in and I look and say, okay, what's happening in EMEA, what is happening in Asia, what is happening in LATAM, as it relates to either global economic activities or specifically as it relates to AI. So I have one of the agent components of it looks at what have been the latest releases, what are the things, and I've trained it now as to what it is I'm interested in to understand what's happening in the releases of AI, Gen AI, and the companies that matter as it relates to our businesses. So I don't know if there's a whole lot that is surprising outside of the depth, capability, and I'll call it the speed at which it can return useful insights. And then of course you can query against it. I have also the ability to look inside our own portfolio companies to monitor that. We have about 90 or so companies to monitor what is actually occurring and what pickup rates, what KPIs are important to me and to us that I need to focus on. So it's been a marvelous journey, and excited as every week I talk with my team about what I need to tune a little bit better, make it a little more useful for my application use as executive here.
And when you talked about your portfolio companies, I know there was a lot of sort of back and forth, maybe some confusion about remarks that you made about employment, how it could affect productivity and employment more broadly, and also within Vista. So what's your perspective on the job impact, both at your company and broadly in society? Clearly there are going to be some benefits and there's going to be a shift.
Yeah, it is a highly effective technology that will create disruption in different forms at, call it, different levels. In some cases, it's going to be a massive enablement tool for people to become more effective. In some cases, it's going to eliminate the need for certain activities. Those who are doing, I call it some engaging back and forth with data systems. Well, these agents, when taught and trained effectively, actually eliminate a lot of that work and can actually do it faster, lower cost, more efficiently. And I'm going through a whole review now. And so we are actually actively deploying these agents to create efficiencies across our entire infrastructure. Like I said, in some instances, not all knowledge workers will be affected in some way. Some, there will no longer be that job category.
Of course.
For some, it will be a hyper, I'll call it a hyper accelerant of their capabilities.
Yeah.
And I tell some folks, look, AI is not going to replace the job in some businesses, but the person using AI will replace your job. So those are the dynamics that we're actually seeing, and those who become a little more familiar and understand its capabilities, first, will have the ability to actually be a little more extensible in their capabilities in the institutions in which they work.
AI is clearly making a lot of people very uncomfortable. A lot of companies, a lot of workers that they're not prepared, they don't understand it. How optimistic are you about Vista's future, about AI's impact on companies?
So the way I think about it, AI is a true general purpose technology. It is going to affect every single business, and it is either going to be exponential for some or existential for others. And I'm optimistic in the way that we are embracing it, embedding it across all of our companies. This is now an exponential opportunity.
And you've been, you started at Goldman, you were investment banking for years, you've been in software for so long. Over your career, how does this moment feel to you as an opportunity versus all the other technological revolutions that you've seen?
All the others have, in some respects, with the exception of, I'll call it the distribution of compute. That was a major transformation in the global environment. Now we've distributed compute, throughout the world, and I'll call it all the things attendant to, embracing compute. This is at that level and potentially more because the capabilities actually give, I'll call it an average person, the ability to utilize technology at a higher rate than we had in just providing some compute technologies available. Typically, it was a little higher order of employee that had the ability to do it. If you utilize these tools well, actually, any employee has the ability to utilize the capabilities of AI and make it more effective. So I think it actually has an inflection opportunity for individuals to be more productive, more capable, and frankly, create a whole lot more productivity throughout our global economy. So it's an exciting time to be an investor in this space.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Yeah, very good to see you.